Tonight, let's finish up our conversation that we started last week about the irrelevant elephant in our additional elephant series. If you remember last week, we were talking about the problem that we have, and no one likes to talk about it, but the problem is we don't like to change. Change is tough, okay? Change is hard. And I'm not talking about core value changing, right? We laid all this out last week. And I think when we got to the end last week, I said, and so the struggle becomes, we are following an unchanging God in a rapidly changing world. So what do we have to do to be effective, to be the follower we need to be able to share and reach the world around us with the love of Christ? How do we do that? How do we navigate that? Because we, by nature, people don't like to change. And we defined irrelevance, if you remember, between the gap between how quickly you change and how quickly things change around you. That gap is where we defined irrelevance. Not that you're not relevant, not that you don't have value, but it's just how do you still speak into a world that is changing very, very fast and not be considered irrelevant with nothing to say? How do you manage to stay on the edge enough to be able to do that? Because change really is very much a part of who we're called to be as followers of God. I mean, change is something He has called us to do. Change is something that He's called us to be. And so that is a part of the call of Christ. And so how does that work? We spent some time and we looked at, Ecclesiastes, and there's a season for everything. And so we kind of worked through all of that. Let's begin tonight on Hebrews 13:8. Hebrews 13:8. And then we'll pick up new stuff, try to wrap this elephant up because next week we have another elephant to talk about. Somebody read Hebrews 13:8 for us, loud and proud.
Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever.
He doesn't change. And I know that there's always pushback when it comes in a church environment because because we say, well, you know what? Timeless values, they don't change. No, they don't. God never changes. No, He doesn't. God's values are timeless. Yes, they are. And so, what I'm talking about when I talk about change is how willing are we to figure out new ways to say it so it's heard and resonates with people who need to hear it. Because see, if you know the truth, you don't need to hear the truth. You know it. Your job is to share it. If you're living by the truth and you're growing in God and you're following Him and you're being a good disciple, then you know what? You have the role of influencing people around you. And you say, well, I don't know any people. Meet some people. You say, well, they don't speak my language. You've learned to speak languages quickly and very fast. You adapt to things so much quicker than you think you do. You use a cell phone? That's a new life skill for some of you. Some of you in this room, when you came out, phones used to be on a wall with a cord and a rotary dial.
And you could always find them.
Yeah, you can always find them. Always find them. And then, see, we couldn't be satisfied with that. We had to advance. And so then we came up with these things called answering machines, where people could leave you a message. Now you had no excuse not to get the message. I left you a message. Then we evolved to cell phones. They were big, about this big. And now we text and we email. But I mean, so you can change. You can change. But change is difficult. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about why we don't change and then what we have to do to change, if you wouldn't mind. Again, I'll tread lightly. I have said to you before, and I contend, that a lot of people don't change because the effort and the pain of change is greater than the pain they are currently in. Okay? I know a lot of people who fall in that trap. Change is painful sometimes. And so the pain to go through that change is not as bad as the pain they're currently dealing with. You ever see somebody that's really going through something, you go, why don't they do something about that? because the pain and the heartache to change is going to be worse than the heartache they're currently experiencing. And they figure that out. Now, they never verbalize it that way. But that's real. And it's real in a lot of different areas. And you can kind of fill in the gap when you think about that. But we all understand that. We struggle with that. And change is painful sometimes, which is why we resist it. No, you don't want to hear you're going to change. You need to change. No one takes that news well. When someone tells you got to change, you need to trust them. You need to have value in what they're saying. I mean, that needs to come from a doctor or somebody. I mean, when someone says you got to change this, for you to receive that, you really do have to have some type of relationship with them, because we are resistant to change. We don't like it. It doesn't feel good. It takes effort. But for some reason, we have developed a theology that says because God doesn't change, we don't need to change. You're not God. Good theology says because God doesn't change, you are always changing to become more like Him. That's good theology. God didn't save you so you wouldn't change. He saved you so you would change. And so we can't lose the ability to speak and be heard into a world that needs to do this. We have to be willing to be able to find ways to communicate that will connect. And I don't want to use the word relevant, but we'll use it because we're talking about the irrelevant. Take Kodak, for example. Kodak is a great example of this. Kodak as a company, there was a bitter war inside Kodak between the digital division and the print division. Okay? Kodak as a company, you remember, Kodak, they were the leading camera maker in America. It's ironic that Kodak was the company that developed the digital camera. But Kodak forgot something. They believed incorrectly that they were in the printed picture business instead of the business of capturing memories. So as a result, Kodak as a company files for bankruptcy, and the picture world as we know it moves from photo albums to digital storehouses, clouds, your phone. Why? Because the maker of the digital camera is Kodak. They were the ones that created it. And they made an internal decision that the picture business was about printing pictures, and that's where the culture wanted. And guess what? The culture didn't want it. The culture wanted the technology. They wanted to change. And so whoever those executives were at Kodak basically made decisions that ultimately tanked the company because they could not evolve to a new model. And they didn't understand their audience well enough to connect with them. And so, had they looked at it right, they would still be in business. But in 2012, they filed for bankruptcy. And so Kodak no longer was the leader. See, when the game changes, you have to be willing to change the way that you play the game. In sports, you do the same thing. Offenses, defenses, they evolve. The way that people do things, a new idea, and then one season it's a new idea. The next season, everybody's doing it. And so everybody's then adapting and making corrections and trying to come up with whatever they need to do to make it work. And so what is it about us that is so hesitant to change? I got a couple ideas. The first one is this. It's not that we're opposed to change. We're just opposed to change that we didn't think of. Right? It's not that we're opposed to change. Because I was saying, hey, we need to change something. Yeah. But you're just opposed to change that you didn't think of. See, change happens in two ways. It's externally imposed on you, or it's internally driven. We like the internally driven change. We don't like that externally driven kind of change. You like to do change when you come up with it. And, for example, if you make the decision to be in your office sitting at your desk by 8 a.m. every morning, and you make that decision because you want to be productive, you like that change. If your boss says, oh, you're going to be here at 8 o'clock, and you're going to punch this clock, and you're going to be sitting at your desk at 8 o'clock, you don't like that change. Now, both of them get you at the desk at 8 o'clock, which is probably a good thing for you and a good thing from the company. The difference is, one of the changes you decided you wanted to be a better employee. The other was your boss was trying to make you a better employee. 8 o'clock, still got to be there. Change the schedule, and we get nervous about it. And so change is inevitable. Change is always going to happen. And the challenge with cultural and social changes is that we can ignore them, we can resist them, or we can fight them. But remember the herd that I gave you last week. No one asks for permission to change. Change is going to happen whether you want it to or not. It doesn't ask for permission, it just changes. And then you have to make a decision, how are you going to react to that? Can you react and be proactive? Can you get in front of it? Are you always going to be behind it? And that's tough. When I do church leadership conferences, I'm always telling church leaders, we're real good in church. A lot of churches are doing really well. They're about at the year 2000 now. They've drugged themselves to the year 2000. I mean, so what? We're 23 years behind the curve, but that's better than most, right? Because a lot of them are still stuck in the 70s and 80s. And that's the way it works. Even when Glenn was here last week, when I asked him, I said, do buildings not smell like they have a smell? They smell like the 70s and 80s. They do. I mean, there are some churches in Central Florida, you walk in and they smell. They stink like they did 20 years ago. I don't know why. I think the smell just permeates. Anyway, but we can change. We just don't like someone telling us we have to change. We like to change what we choose. Another difference, another problem we have is we crave what we already like. In other words, think about your appetite. You probably don't crave a food that you've never tried before. That's because it's impossible to crave something you haven't sampled, smelled, or experienced, right? You don't even have a category for it because you don't know what it is. It's unknown to you. As a result, when it comes to your eating habits, you have a built-in bias towards your go-to foods. If you're going to go somewhere to eat, where are you going to go? Go into Hugh and the Goose. That's your go-to food. I mean, that's the default. But we do it with everything. Our work patterns, our life habits, our decorating taste, and other preferences, they operate the same way. Because you come up with what are effective strategies, and you want to repeat it because it's been successful and you like it. And so we do it. We talked about music last week. So you'll put a playlist if you figured out how to use Spotify. Spotify will help you do this, but you will create a playlist that really does figure out what you like to listen to. And so when you open your Spotify app, it will say a playlist created especially for you on this day. And all Spotify has done is gone back and kept track because everyone's watching you. And they're telling people in China what you listen to. And then they're putting a unique playlist that will play for about an hour and a half of songs that you're going to like before you even hear it and before you even know what's coming up. So you turn that on in your car and you're going to hear music that you like. Because that's the way it works. That's your go-to stuff. So if you're a 70s, 80s rocker, you'll hear that. If you like those adult contemporary classics, you'll hear that. If you like to hear the Gaither vocal band, you'll hear that. I mean, you can figure out, what you like, and that's our go-to stuff. And so that's what we crave. We do it with our clothes. Everything about us. We have the things that we are most comfortable in. And for me, I hate wearing a pair of dress jeans. I hate that. I like my comfortable blue jeans. I hate I hate wearing dress jeans, you know, when I have to put on a suit with my jeans. I hate that. I hate those dress jeans. I just hate that because, you know, that's just not my comfort clothes. I don't do that, you know. I hate to button my top button. I hate that. It's just awful. And the one tie I have when I can find it and I put it on, it's awful. It's not the way I like to dress. I go to my comfort. I always lean back into what makes me most comfortable. But we crave what we like. That's why change is hard. We just know what we like. We just like it. Nothing wrong with just liking it, as long as it just doesn't become something that you can never escape and that you're never willing to step away from. Another reason we have problems with change is we encounter problems with success. And what I mean by that is, there comes a time in our life where we embrace enough change to become successful. And when we become successful, then we're afraid to do anything different and keep changing because we've experienced success when we were changed. And sometimes, so you adapt and it works. You're like, oh yeah, it worked and I changed and I'm successful now. Okay, I'm not going to change again. But you have to keep changing or things begin moving away from you. So what happens is you experience a level of success and you say, hey, this really worked great. But the problem is that success can make you conservative. And the more successful you are, the less likely you are to change. And that's proven time and time and time again. It happens with companies all the time. And so rather than adapt, we just fall behind. You know, you've been to a mall lately? See, when I was a kid, now Altamont really is an exception to this, by the way. Altamont is that rare hub out there in the middle of the universe that seems to be operating differently than most other malls. But when I was a kid, man, going to the mall was awesome. Right? That was a place to go. We would go hang out at the mall and get all sorts of trouble. I mean, stores and you'd go shopping. Love to go to the mall because you find anything you want at the mall. I mean, it was a great place to go shop. And if you want anything, you would have to go to the mall. Man, malls, Central Town Center, that's awful. Malls are nothing like they used to be. Again, Altamont seems to be the exception to the rule, but at malls, I mean, now you walk to a mall and you're lucky to find a store you recognize or a store that's open. The anchor stores, they don't have anchor stores anymore. You know, they got little huts in the middle of the mall instead. I mean, and now because why? Amazon's our go-to. I'll get it online. I can get it cheaper, deliver to my house. Shoot, you're a Prime member, you can probably have it within 2 days. Save you a trip to the mall. And if you go to the mall and you can't find the selection, you remember the days some of you had to go shopping and Christmas shopping was such an effort because you would go to a store, you couldn't find it, so you have to go to another store to look for it, another store to look for it. No, you don't do that anymore. You look online. Because we all know if you can't get online, it's not worth having. Right? And so, but think of all of the vendors and the stores that didn't adapt. I left it in the office. I was going to bring it out. I about fell out of my chair the other day. And, it's just me. I'm just behind the times. I didn't know Montgomery Ward still existed. Montgomery Ward still exists. I know because I was approved for credit and they sent me a catalog. It came this week, here, to this place. I picked up Montgomery Ward's. I've been there since I was a kid. The old Montgomery Wards that I used to go to is now the Sheriff's Department. Right off John Young Parkway and Colonial Drive. That was Montgomery Wards. When I was a kid, that's where we would go to Montgomery Wards. Who knew they were still in business? They're an online store now, I guess. But I guess they adapted. But think about it. Sears? Everybody used to go to Sears. Go Sears? Pennies, if you can find one open. Little bitty thing. I used to go to Winter Park Mall as a kid all the time too. That was the hot mall in town when I was a kid. Huh?
Kroger food store?
Kroger. I remember Kroger.
Out of business. In Florida.
In Florida, they're out of business. They're big up north. Yeah.
Now they're delivering.
Yeah. They deliver.
Home delivery.
Remember anybody in Orlando remember A&P's?
Yeah.
Remember the Piggly Wiggly?
Yes.
Remember Food World?
Not food world.
You remember Food World? Food Fair? See, and those that couldn't adapt are now gone. you have to adapt to change. I mean, Matt will tell you the stories when we talked about this back during the pandemic. What happened? How was he going to survive as a restaurant? Well, they had to start delivering food. I cut down the profit margins. I mean, he'll tell you the stories about that. But I mean, now it's just kind of a given. I have an app on my phone for DoorDash. I have Uber Eats because I'm just like everybody else. I'm sometimes too lazy to get out of my seat. I want them to bring it to me. I'll pay that extra bit to get them to bring it to my house, and that way I don't have to get in my car or truck and have to drive anywhere else because, well, I stink and I don't want to go in. I don't want to take a shower before I go. Because, see, if I did that, I'd have to tear myself away from Netflix. And I can't do that because I'm addicted. And so I I can run the world with my phone now. That's just the way we are. And so for us, we have to understand that change is always happening and we have to do it. And if not, that gap starts to fill out and we become irrelevant. And so what does it look like? What does change look like? And so I'm going to give you some practical advice, okay? As a parent, I've learned this. I am lucky enough to be a parent of adult children who are grown. I have grandchildren. And I also have a middle schooler in the house. So I have a range of children that were born in various eras of history with various technologies available to them. And so I now have the wisdom of the ages in this gap between my children. There's a shift I've made in parenting, I've discovered. When I was 20, some odd years old, and my first one came along, I didn't know what I was doing. And I had to borrow a vehicle to go pick Brooke up at the hospital because I didn't have a car in Texas. So I had to borrow a vehicle and a car seat to go get my own kid and bring her home from the hospital when I was in Texas. That's the way it worked, right? When you're 20 some odd years old, you do what you got to do. I asked the hospital if they wanted to keep her. They said no. And so I went to get her and brought her home and brought her back to a little seminary apartment. That's how I started. My middle one was adopted, and so I thought this was the greatest way in the world because someone just drove up in a car. She was 3 days old, and they just handed her. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. So much easier. How cool is that? It was just much cleaner, quick transaction. Man, you can't beat that. Caden comes along. It was a little bit messier to kind of get him in the house, but so I mean, we kind of went through the whole thing. But what happened is my mission was always the same. I love my kids. At age 20, 21, 22, whatever I was when Brooke was born, I loved her. I've loved her ever since. Caden comes along. I love him. I'm going to keep loving him. My mission hasn't changed, but my parenting style has changed a lot. I'm old and lazy now. The hills I would die on for that first one. Okay, that gator ain't going to hurt your son. Go up there and hit it in the head. See what it does. I wouldn't let Brooke out of the car with a gator out there in that pond. But, Caden, go see the gator, Caden. Go on, get out of here. Go see the gator. See what's going on with it. You just change. The hills that you die on are different. And here's the other thing for you parents in the room. You guys know this to be true. If you're parents long enough, boy, you don't quit parenting. Those adult children. I thought the little kids were tough. Oh, no. When your kids become adults, you don't get to quit parenting. Oh, no. There's a whole book to be written about that. That's a whole different vibe and dynamic. Because then they got like personalities, and you can't muscle up on them and just whack them out anymore. And then they find out they're a little bit like you, which really drives you nuts sometimes. They kind of push back on you like, gosh, where'd that come from? And then if you're lucky enough to still have parents around watching that happen, they just sit back and laugh. I told you that was going to happen. They do that to you. And I pray that you guys all have grandkids enough to be able to do that and laugh at your own children as they're raising them. But the way that I have to connect to Caden is a lot different than I had to connect to Brooke. He lives in a very different world than Brooke grew up in and was born into. It's radically different. The things that he struggles with and the things that he sees every day and the things that he hears every day, that wasn't Brooke's world. You know, after the shooting in Nashville, man, way to school the next day, we talked about that shooting. You know, when your middle school looks at you and goes, should I be worried, Dad? Yeah, I never, ever, one time in my life was worried. I never remember a day I was dropped off at school worried about whether someone's going to come shoot me or not, or shoot their way through the doors. That's a different world. The conversations are different. They've changed. And so here's what you have to know. You have to love the mission more than the methods. Remember I said to you, my illustration was, the mission was I'm going to love my kids. But I will admit to you, the way that I'm raising them, the way I have dealt with each one of them is different. And you know what? I've changed my style of parenting on the kid's personality. I mean, I've had my middle child look back at me and say, well, you didn't do that with Brooke. That's not fair. I'm like, it's not about being fair. I'm your father. I'm not fair. That phrase came out of my mouth so many times. I'm your father. I am not fair. Then I would quote the Stallone line, I am the law. What the law says works. I'd go Judge Dredd on them. But it was, and then with Caden, it's different too. Like I said, Caden, okay. Go ahead, go do your thing, son. He's a boy. I used to have this philosophy about girls. I always say, God will only send boys to men who needed help. Now, when I was raising daughters, that was what I always say to dads. I have 2 daughters. God only sends boys to men who need help. Now I'm father of a son. I needed help. I can admit to you, I needed help. I needed some more help. And so I've come full circle on that. But our methods always have to point to the mission. So what is our mission? Our mission is to be able to communicate with the world around us, the love of Christ, and to communicate in a way that we're heard and we can relate. It doesn't mean you have to become something that you're not, but it does mean that you have to be willing to deal with the methodology, because what you did in 1965 is not going to work in 2023. I can promise you that. The way that I pastor has changed. The way that I work has changed. Everything changes. It does. It has to, because change is a constant. So you have to love the mission more than the methods. Let me give you another. You have to get radical. And what I mean by that is incremental changes bring incremental results. Radical change will bring radical results. In a rapidly changing world, sometimes what we're guilty of is not realizing, well, I changed a little bit, that's enough. Well, maybe you need to change a little bit more. And you have to be willing to. The problem that I know I have, and the problem that I think a lot of people have, is we just don't like to change. We just don't want to deal with that. Why do I have to be different? Well, you have to be different because we're called to touch and change the world of Christ. So how are we going to communicate? How are we going to do that? I said something to a group of pastors before Christmas, and when I said it, I didn't understand the impact of what I was saying. And I will admit to you today, I still don't understand it. Okay? So I don't really know where it came from. I'm going to assume it was either a wild hair or the Holy Spirit. And sometimes it can be one and the same. But I asked the pastors, I said, have you ever thought or ever dealt with the fact that when we do church, we always do church and we say, well, we're a church with a digital presence. I said, or could it possibly be that now ministry is really a digital presence with a much smaller physical presence? I mean, if we're doing church right, don't we have a big digital influence and a smaller physical imprint? Because we got to have the relationships, we got to have community, but the methodology has changed so much Could it be that we haven't kept up with that? And I was just asking the question. He had thought I'd lit a bomb in the room. I mean, I was getting somebody lecturing me on, well, church is about people and people have to get together. And I kept saying, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not. I'm just asking the question. We have to be willing to at least ask the questions to figure out how much we have to change. And there's sometimes we got to get a little crazy. And understand that we're doing both. And doing both isn't wrong. It's just different. And we got to figure out how to do it better. And get so good at it that the rest of the world says, that's a model I like. The church rarely has ever done that. The other thing we have to do, and we're done, we have to become a student of culture. In other words, you don't have to be dressed differently. You don't have to act. But you have to understand it. You have to understand it. When Caden wants to talk to me about playing Roblox, I got news for me. That's a different language. But you know what I do? I sit with him while he plays Roblox. Because I need to know and I need to watch. And I monitor screen time. And it's limited. And the clock's ticking. And you only get so much, and then it's done. That's the way we do it. That's the way it works. Put it up. You're done. No more. It's a language, it's a currency that works great with him, too. Gets in trouble? Lost your screen time, son. You're done for the day. Oh, Dad, I know. I'm not fair. But again, I care because he cares. I want to know because he wants to know. Again, I had girls before. We didn't do Legos. I got Legos everywhere in my house. I have Legos that are scary, wicked, cool. We have 2 Lego roller coasters. One of them loops. It's awesome. I looked at my mom one time and said, why couldn't I have these toys when I was a kid? I didn't realize we were poor. I was deprived. I didn't know. Well, man, if you really loved me, you'd have got me these things. And so I've been dealing with that. I'm seeing a counselor about that. But you have to be able to get in and figure out how that works and at least understand. Anyway, all right, we got to be done. We have to go get our kids. Let's pray, and we'll pick up next time. God, thank you that you are a God who you don't change. And because of that, you give us the freedom to change. My prayer is that we wouldn't become irrelevant, that we would look for those ways that we can find, connect, and speak into a world that doesn't always want to hear about the things of God, and do so in a way that's effective and helpful and useful in getting people to the kingdom. It's our prayer, our hope for this week. In Jesus' name, amen.